Okay, good day, everyone.
Good day.
This is Joe Gallo from ASPI, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. We should also make note of the fact that this presentation by any participant is not intended as a recommendation or any event for medical advice or medical treatment, and we suggest that you consult your doctor or other medical teams for any advice that you may well need. And with that, I'd like to introduce our chair, Mark Lichty.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm really excited about this particular webinar that we have for you. The folks that are going to be talking are all friends. They're all parts of the board or part of the program team, but they've been on the journey that you're on. And we chose the title from the Eagles song, Peaceful, Easy Feeling. And that the words on that, by the way, go on to say that you won't let me down because I am already standing on the ground. And it's a reminder that we all stand together and we're not going to let you down. We're all in this journey to support one another. And it reinforces the message that anxiety is a poor master and we're not alone. We're bombarded by messages of fear today, COVID variants, stock market dropping, but for this time together, let's leave that behind us. We hope that in this moment together, we can create a sanctuary of peace for you. And I wanted to say too, that we thank you for your feedback. You'd indicated, for example, that you wanted us to try to hit the chat box questions first, and we're going to try to do that today. In fact, so I don't forget to mention it, what we want to do is we want to have you, for example, Thrainn is going to start, and we want you to address just questions that you have about Gleason 8 and his process to him, so that when we post these, then he'll have his presentation, but the questions that directly relate to him will be handled at that moment. And that'll make it easier for future people that are confronting his kind of a situation. And one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize is that, yes, ASPI proactive, but we're very much pro-intervention if intervention is necessary. I just got a sign on here that my internet is unstable. I hope one of the board members or somebody will let me know if it's difficult to hear me. In any event, let me continue. So the presenters, they're all close friends, and they've all been on active surveillance. And two of those, Joe and Thrainn, have progressed to treatment. We're not going to be doing our usual program in December. There's a special program, and we'll send something to you about this later on, but it's called the Research Outcomes Institute, the Prostate Cancer Research Outcomes Institute, or PCORI, and that'll be holding an event on December 13th and 16th. And the purpose of that event is to listen to the voice of active surveillance patients. And the study is headed up by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Siddiqui and Dr. Coopersberg. And the point of that conference is going to be to engage patients like you in a dialogue with the academic community. So it's an unusual opportunity that we haven't seen before. And as I say, we'll send you some more information on that. We also, well, we're going to, I'll just mention in brief, you're going to hear from Thrainn, who was a Gleason 8, Joe, a Gleason 9, Dave Keller, who went through the Gleason 7 process, and then Phil, who was a Gleason 6. Originally, we were going to hear from me, but I don't think we're going to have enough time. I want to thank all the presenters and all the people that were involved in putting this program together. I wanted to say also, we need your help if you have web talent or any sorts of talents that might be useful to us. My email address is in the chat box, so don't hesitate to reach out to me. I also wanted to mention that we had previously sent the European UOMO Quality of Life Survey, a link to that. I think it's about a 20-minute survey to do, and I put that in the chat box too if you want to fill that out. And so we want to thank all of you that have donated to us. We don't have a staff. We rely entirely on donations from folks like you to keep going. And actually, I'd like to ask if Jeff McClellan, our fundraising chair, might share a few words. Jeff, you have some things you might want to say?
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everybody. I'm from California, originally from Montreal, Canada. And of course, you know, this organization spans the globe. We are a global organization. We welcome any and all, and we try to portray that information out. And most importantly, in order to do that, we need your funding. Now, today is a very special day because one of our board members has guaranteed that he will match your donation up to $5,000. That's a tremendous opportunity for all of you, particularly if some of you have tax reasons to donate at the end of the year. Live, learn, and thrive from active surveillance. We are here to help you live. Living is a journey and not a destination. Along the way, you'll find that active surveillance has many stops. Whether you're treated or untreated, there are many new, exciting technological and scientific changes as we go along. So it is a journey and not a destination. Don't go it alone. Join us whenever you can. We're always here to help. My email is G as in George, T as Thomas, McLennan, McLennan @gmail.com. Contact me anytime about donations. I'd love to help you out. And remember, today is a very special day. And as always, we have coupons that we will send you, one from Navitas and another from Daya. These are plant-based organizations, and I believe that their products are distributed particularly in North America, but perhaps in the rest of the world. And if not, we'd be glad to have you in North America. Thank you, Mark, for allowing me to present.
You're welcome, Jeff, and thank you for that. I wanted to mention Howard Walensky and I will be co-moderating today. Howard's a good friend and really one of the leaders in the active surveillance world. And I'm going to make these introductions short because the folks that are presenting today are all humble men. Their reward is knowing that they might be of help to you. So the first, we did a video of Thrainn Thorvaldsen here because originally we thought Thrainn was going to be in Germany, but actually he showed up today. So he can actually answer questions too. For you. So Thrainn is our Icelandic board member. He helped found this organization. He has really, in many ways, led the world in active surveillance.
Ladies and gentlemen, I send you greetings from Reykjavik, Iceland. It is an honor being asked to address you. I have often made presentations about my prostate cancer story. Today, I will do a different approach to what I have presented before. My presentation is about how being diagnosed with prostate cancer improved my life. Everyone who has been diagnosed with cancer remembers when the doctor says the following sentence: the results have arrived. You have been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Many men talk about the black curtain that they feel is being pulled down in front of them, and they have little recollection what the doctor says next. I have compared this to be working in an Icelandic wilderness in happy sunshine when suddenly fog rolls in without warning. You no longer know where you are and where you are going. That is why the support of those who have walked the paths before and appear next to you in the fog is so important. This support is about the activities of ASPI. When I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in February 2005 at the age of 61, I was shocked. I was fortunate enough to receive guidance that led me out of the fog into a 14-year successful journey. During this time, nearly all men diagnosed with prostate cancer went into treatment. I became acquainted with the work of Dr. Lawrence Klotz of Toronto, Canada, who had presented the theory that not all men diagnosed with prostate cancer needed treatment. After having learned about Dr. Klotz's ideas, my wife Elin and I decided, contrary to the Icelandic doctor's advice, that I will not go into treatment. We choose what is now called active surveillance, which means not being treated, but undergo close monitoring. I was on active surveillance for 14 years with full quality of life and went into treatment when the first sign was that the cancer was growing. After having radiation and androgen deprivation therapy 2 years ago, my PSA is now 0.04. My story can be read on the ASPI website. Nobody wants to be diagnosed with cancer and end up in the fog. But the diagnosis of prostate cancer is not just about fog and uncertainty. It is also about finding positive aspects if you are lucky enough to be diagnosed early with low values and can decide your destination. In my life, there was a turning point when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I often refer to my life before and after diagnosis. In that respect, I have wondered what I would have missed if I had not been diagnosed with prostate cancer. One, more positive attitudes towards life. My doctors in Iceland were not happy with our couple's decision not to go for treatment. Uncertain future and even a limited lifespan was predicted in my case. This was the normal attitude of doctors at that time. The decision about active surveillance and the risk I was taking by not undergoing treatment led me and my wife to change our view on life. We were grateful for each day I lived. We tried to enjoy each moment better than we had done before. We did not tell anyone about my condition except our children and their spouses until after 2 years, in case I would pass away from prostate cancer.
Tell Joe.
My wife and I have always been harmonious, but I believe that being diagnosed with prostate cancer brought us even closer together.
People to the,
Two,
from the waiting room.
doing today that we would otherwise have postponed until tomorrow. We felt that we had many unfinished things to do in life. Sorry. For example, domestic and international travel. We had planned to enjoy this as soon as my busy working career ended. In my work, I had to travel a lot while Elin was at home. She had not been to many places where I had been. After being diagnosed, we decided to travel more than we had done before and do things which we would have done later. 3, healthier lifestyle. My wife and I have always lived a healthy life, but now we even did better. We, for example, reduced consumption of red meat and dairy products. We increased the consumption of fruit and vegetables. We have only eaten fruits for breakfast for 16 years. We have also consumed natural products that we thought could have an inhibitory effect on cancer. It is debatable whether this consumption kept the cancer down. There is a lack of scientific research to prove it, but strong beliefs make results possible. Whether it is for this or other reasons, I controlled my cancer for 14 years, and my wife, Ellen, has not had breast cancer. 4, opportunities to help others. 2 years after I was diagnosed, I opened the discussion about prostate cancer and started giving presentations, especially for older men in men's clubs. I have appeared on television, radio, and in newspaper interviews. I have also written articles. My name is related to prostate cancer diagnosis, and men who have been diagnosed have been calling me for support. I also started collaboration with the Icelandic Cancer Society, which referred men to me who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer. In recent years, I have talked to a large number of men on the phone and even met them in person in a cafe if they felt bad. My reward has frequently been hearing a deep breath after, often followed by this sentence: "Thank you so much for giving your time to talk to me. I feel so much better." Much material from me about my personal experience of prostate cancer can be found on the internet. Many men who talk to me have said that they have read all prostate cancer material posted online connected to my name. Men like to learn of personal experiences. 5, meeting number of individuals. Through this help and support, I have met number of individuals I would not otherwise have met. I, together with a friend, founded the first independent active surveillance support group in Iceland and even beyond. I had the initiative in cooperation with friends of re-establishing an organization called Framför, which means in Icelandic progress, which was originally founded in 2007. That organization had not been active in recent years. No general organization of men who had been diagnosed with prostate cancer was then active in Iceland. I am now the chairman of this organization. Through those social activities, I have met and worked with a number of interesting people. 6, interest turned into a hobby. Many senior citizens complain that they do not have enough work to do when they retire. The project to help men who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer is now my biggest hobby and my main project in old age, now that I am 77 years old. The tasks are endless. This project will possibly be the most important work I have undertaken in my life, supported by my wife. 7, make new international friends. My wife Ellen and I have attended the Prostate Cancer Research Institute conference in Los Angeles 3 times. In connection with this conference, I met interesting men who became my friends and led to the establishment of ASPI. More men have joined this group working on ASPI matters. These men have become good friends of mine, although I have never met some of them in person except through a number of Zoom meetings. Participation in international activities such as ASPI leads to connection and friendship that transcends borders and oceans. I took the initiative of making our organization Framför a member of Europe UOMO, an organization of 27 associations of prostate cancer organizations in Europe. In that organization, I have made good acquaintances. So what are my conclusions? There are positive aspects to being diagnosed with prostate cancer, especially if you are lucky enough to be diagnosed early with low test values and can enjoy quality of life after diagnosis. These positive aspects can even lead to greater life fulfillment and more happiness in life and make new friends, even internationally. Thank you for your attention.
Very good, Thrainn. This is Joe Gallo of ASPI, and I'll be presenting my background again a little bit later. So what I'd like to ask you, though, is given that you and I are two of the folks who have progressed to having treatment, when you decided to make that risk 16 years ago, maybe counter to what your doctors were telling you, as you might have found it stressful, what would you have done differently if you were diagnosed today?
Well, I think even today I would be better supported because the evidence and the research and there are more information available which supported my decision. I would have, given that I have the same values as I had 16 years ago, I would take the same decision, make the same decision to have active surveillance.
And what advice would you give to the newly diagnosed then today, especially with dealing with the stressful decision that has to be made?
Well, I think that the most important is, of course, is to have the evidence. What I feel when I have meetings, and we organize meetings with newly diagnosed men, and this so often that we found out that the men don't know their values. They don't know their Gleason scores. They don't know even PSA, and it's so difficult for them to make any decision. So it's so important, first of all, to have the knowledge and also talk to others who have been on this path. Because as I said earlier, it is very hard to be in the fog, but the only way to get out of the fog is to talk to men like us and listen to the advice, because we have been through this very much difficult path. And I am very happy to be able to comfort the men who have been diagnosed and give them support. So most important is to, of course, attend to the seminars at the ASPI and talk to others and have information and find the information.
Well, as you pointed out, you enjoy supporting men with prostate cancer, and you said it turned from an interest into a hobby. And I would suggest it's gone even beyond that. It's become an avocation, a major component of your life. What did you find most rewarding about that?
You mean of giving the support?
Yeah.
I found it most rewarding because, and I find it so easy to understand the situation men are in. And I found interesting, I was thinking about us, even in the ASPI, and also those who I am working with in Iceland, that it seems to be what we have in common. And most of us had difficulties in the early beginning. When we were diagnosed, we had difficulties, we were not happy with the doctors. And that is so, that makes us interested in working with those newly diagnosed. And the most rewarding is the gratitude which I get from men who have been talked to. And there are so many cases where people have said, oh, I'm so happy, thank you. Because as strangely enough, men I've been talking to, they have not been through. There is so much material on the internet, there are so many brochures, that it seems to be that most of those men have not actually been reading through those literature. And in a way, it's understandable when we have studied this for a number of years, but those men who suddenly last week got this word from the doctors, it's difficult to understand this cancer. This is one of the most complicated cancer to be analyzed.
So you can actually be then a strong support for those who are just beginning the journey and help guide them to be able to find their way.
Yes.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, because we've talked about this before, and that is the fact that active surveillance needs to be active, which is why you were able then to get to a point where you could determine maybe that you would need some treatment. But one of the things that we know is that being on active surveillance also has a major benefit of allowing us to be able to defer treatment, if ever, as it, if it should ever become necessary as the technology advances. And we also know that most men will be able to stay on active surveillance for an extended period, all the way even through life. If we would never need treatment, but what advice would you give to patients or thrivers? I hate to call them survivors because we're more than survivors. That what would you give, that advice would you give them to help ensure that they do stay active and that they do stay engaged?
I think that the most important is, like I have done for all those years. I have had PSA test every 6 months. And that is so important, of course, to have those tests and be able to follow if there are any signs of this could be increasing, like in my case. Then I decided to have a treatment 16 years later. But hopefully those men can stay long on active surveillance and have a happy life like I and my wife have been doing. But the most important is to be monitored and not to worry, because the most important fact is that over 90% of those who are being diagnosed, they have a long life expectancy, 90% for 10 years. So there is nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and then if a treatment does become necessary, you've had all of that time for those treatments to become even more proficient and be better, more beneficial.
Yes, that's right. And this is also because in those 16 years, all the technology and information, it was so advanced during those years. It was so much different. If I would have, for example, had radiation treatment 16 years ago, it's quite different than having the radiation treatment 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I thank you.
Thank you.
Over to Mark.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you, Thrainn.
Thrainn, your
Thrainn,
is much better than my English. That was an excellent presentation, and
thank you.
You have made that transition in such an elegant fashion, and I watched you in that process, and I'm sure there was a lot of anxiety along the way, but I have to say you did that magnificently. So thank you for that. I think that ends your presentation.
I interrupted myself there. Sorry about that. But in any event, let me see if we can find some chat box questions. There's one for the panel from Steve. Steve, I'm glad to see you here. Let me just say a word about prostate density. And this is a major message of ASPI. We should all know our prostate density. I know I've spoken about this before, but the PSA is pretty irrelevant. You need to know the size of your prostate, and you need to know what your PSA score is, and you put the PSA score over top of the size of your prostate, and then you get a PSA density score. So every time you see a urologist, you should be asking for your PSA density. I don't know if that completely addresses your question, Steve, or not, but in any event, I wanted to make that pitch to you all. One of the things that bothers me, and Thrainn, unmute yourself when you're able to here. One of the things that bothers me is, how is it that the urologists are missing this? We want to get this detected before it gets to a Gleason 8. My friend Dave Kleiser's on this call, and I might have asked Dave to speak a little bit too, because Dave, by the way, had a radical prostatectomy. But what happens is that once you get to be a Gleason 8, it starts to escape from the gland, it starts to get into the lymph. Why is it that this is happening? What should we be doing? What should the audience be doing so that we catch it at a Gleason 7 level, or some time at some place where we can have focal therapy instead of these more radical processes. Do you have any suggestions thrown for the audience?
No, I think I really have to pass that. I'm not able to answer that. I just know that in Iceland, you have to realize that in Iceland, there are not many inhabitants here. We are just 370,000 people. So we say that in America, there are one Islander for 1,000 men in the US. And also the doctors in Iceland, they are very well educated, but they have less opportunities. There are 220 men diagnosed every year. So what I did, that I had second opinion by going to Europe. I went to Frankfurt and I went to Nijmegen in Holland, but I had second opinion. And in the earlier cases, I was second opinion said I had not increased cancer, but the last one, which I had in Frankfurt, showed that I had cancer, but that was just in one sample. But I remember reading an article about how important it is to go to places where there are many cases being diagnosed. So this is a disadvantage we have in Iceland, but I am not criticizing the doctors. They are extremely good, but they have not as many cases to diagnose as abroad. The only thing we can do, I have had MRIs here and I have been through those tests that needed. But like in the case when I was diagnosed, that was in Frankfurt, Germany. So I tried to go to places for the second opinion. I did, where they were more frequent. And the doctor I had in Frankfurt, he told me that he had taken 3,000 samples and analyzed 5,000. So there is, of course, much more experience there. But I repeat again, I am not criticizing the doctors, but my trust is to go for a second opinion somewhere else. So sorry, I cannot answer it in more detail.
Well, it's hard to answer, and I'm probably going to ask Joe the same question. But even in my situation, you don't sort of wake up one morning and you're all of a sudden a Gleason 8, and one time you were Gleason 7, maybe one time you were Gleason 6, and somehow we're still slipping through the cracks and having to have more radical treatment. And that Joe, you'll be presenting, but do you want to answer this question before you present? Do you have any thoughts about how to advise? How can we help? How can we help the urologists catch this earlier before it has this radical treatment process?
As you were just struggling, it's a little bit difficult to be able to come up with one answer. A lot of it is the ability to have a good dialogue going between the individual patient, us guys, and our doctors. We need to make sure that they are being clear and that they are also active in our active surveillance process. That's the key, and what I would be mentioning in my discussion is that staying active is the important thing. We don't want to resort to watchful waiting, just sitting back and waiting to see what might happen.
Okay. Well, I think Howard might have had a question in here, so we'll let me see what Howard asks. So how common is active surveillance in Iceland? You went to Holland and Germany and saw treatment abroad. What do other men in Iceland do? And tell us a little bit about the health insurance environment in Iceland.
The health insurance in Iceland that we have, there is a free health care. It's paid by the government. We pay high taxes, high sales taxes, 24%. And this makes it possible to pay all the medical costs. But I have been to Europe more or less, as I said earlier, because I I wanted to have the second opinion in different circumstances. Now, the doctors in Iceland, they are very much supportive of active surveillance, and that has been increasing, at least from the time 16 years ago. So that has completely changed from what it was. Sorry, so I would say that they are very supportive now about active surveillance. Anything else?
No, I think just to keep moving along here, I think I'm going to introduce Joe. Joe Gallo is a board member. He's as thorough a researcher that we have. He has had every test that you can possibly imagine, and more. And so, Joe, I think you said you might have been diagnosed now at a Gleason 9 level, didn't you?
Don't get too quickly into my presentation. Yes.
Okay. Well, you're on. This is you're it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me give you a little bit of background for everybody. And as Thrainn, my prostate cancer journey has also progressed. You will notice that both Thrainn and I are staying involved with active surveillance ASPI because we are true believers in the value of active surveillance. In the fall of 1969, as a Marine, I was assigned to Da Nang in the middle of the Vietnam War. During that time, they had been using a defoliant known as Agent Orange, and that has been determined that was the cause of my prostate cancer, as well as associated ischemic heart disease and type 2 diabetes. In 2017, with going to my VA treatment, my PSA came up as being 6.29. So properly, my VA doctor recommended that maybe I should see a urologist. So I opted to work with a urologist that was local in my community rather than making the trek to the VA in Philadelphia. If you've never driven the Philadelphia traffic, you'd understand why. With all of that, we did a transrectal biopsy. 3 cores showed low volume Gleason 6. Followed that up with an MP MRI, that's a multiparametric MRI, that resulted in a PIRADS 2. PIRADS 2 is defined as probably benign, a little bit on the border. We discussed the various management alternatives, and with that, I chose to get a second opinion, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get an additional reading. Based on that opinion, the doctor there agreed. So with that, I embarked on my active surveillance. Active surveillance, doing PSAs every 3 to 4 months, and then having a confirmatory biopsy at the 1-year point, followed with another MP MRI. Those tests also came up with the same results, low volume Gleason 6. So we continued with that process. In 2019, we also followed up with another MP MRI and again came back PIRADS 2. I was fortunate to be able to have my MRI results reviewed by Dr. Antonio Westphalen, who looked at it and said, well, probably more like a PIRADS 3. PIRADS 3 is still defined as indeterminate, but saying that there might be something there. Last year, my PSA started to rise slowly. As a good active surveillance patient, we needed to assess my situation a little bit more closely. Earlier this year, I was considered for a study at Fox Chase Cancer Center in an NCI Center of Excellence in Philadelphia. That study was going to be looking at maintaining a healthy lifestyle while being on active surveillance. Unfortunately, the study time limit for 36 months from original diagnosis had expired and I couldn't participate. However, since I was considering getting additional testing, probably another MRI, to look after my PSA rise, I started working with the team at Fox Chase. Dr. Andres Coria, one of the primary implementers of micro ultrasound at Fox Chase, I started to engage with him and we opted to undergo that procedure. I'm going to tell you that that procedure had mixed results. I found the process to be quite tolerable and effective, and it was done in a procedure room under local anesthetic. I know that some of you are aware that there are some hospitals that opt to perform the procedure under general anesthesia in the operating room. I think if you're considering it, you should explore which procedures they use. Immediately after the procedure, and I mean immediately after the procedure, I was able to review the video playback together with my doctor. The results are not what I wanted to see. A significant lesion had been identified. So next step, we arranged for a urine-based liquid biomarker, select MDX, to help decide what our next steps might be. The report we got back showed a high probability of greater than Gleason 7 grade. Based on that information, we went ahead and did a targeted transperineal biopsy. That resulted in several cores of 4 + 4 = 8. Following best practice, we sent the slides to our preeminent Dr. Jonathan Epstein at Johns Hopkins. He did a great job, but again, I wasn't real happy with the results because that's when he came back and said, you got some Gleason 5, so pal, you're now a Gleason 9. Obviously, considering advanced cancer, we needed to discuss treatment. After assessing the potential for surgery, sorry about that. After assessing the potential for surgery, I met with the radiation oncologists at Fox Chase. We discussed the several alternatives and agreed that a short course of 23 sessions of external beam radiation together with HDR brachy was the best procedure for me. And obviously I didn't opt to undergo surgery. That would then be followed by androgen deprivation therapy, ADT. It's a hormone therapy that is intended to deprive the cancer of testosterone on which it feeds. This is the current state that I am in my journey. It's important to remember that active surveillance is perfect for cancers that are diagnosed and remain low or very low and allow avoidance of surgery and or radiation, therefore avoiding the associated possible side effects. And as was mentioned in Thrainn's presentation, this could possibly go on indefinitely. Being on active surveillance also gave me the opportunity to learn more about my cancer and those ways to best manage it. If there's anything good about prostate cancer, it's that medical research and technology is advancing rather quickly as compared to most other medical conditions. For example, earlier this year, I was a participant in the PSMA PET scan trial at the VA in Los Angeles. This test is more sensitive and accurate than the current standard of care, which is bone scan and CT scan, and very likely will replace it, providing the doctors with better information to be able to manage the disease. Each year, there are significant developments in medications and procedures offering improvements in the management of prostate cancer if that became necessary. If cancer requires treatment, AS, active surveillance, provides the ability to defer treatments until necessary, allowing new procedures and medications to become available. Properly managed, active surveillance is the ideal way for the majority of prostate cancer thrivers for possibly the remainder of their life. Thank you.
Hmm.
Okay, jump in.
Yeah, Joe, I don't know where Mark is at the moment.
Oh, I was on mute. I'm sorry. I'm talking to the computer and I forgot to get myself off mute. In any event, Howard, by the way, thank you for jumping in as quickly as you did. So I appreciate that. So there's some discussion here in the chat box on telehealth. I think I'm going to encourage you all to go to the chat box. I think we're going to not deal with that telehealth questions right now because they seem to be pretty individually oriented. So if you want to continue that discussion on the telehealth, go right to the chat box. So one of the questions here is, how many biopsies did you have prior to finding the higher graded score, Joe? Do you think that the Gleason 6 evolved to a higher grade cancer, or could the higher grade cancer have been missed?
I actually think that the 2 biopsies that I had that came up with Gleason 6 were probably effective. And they were both transrectals. I've now become a proponent of not only the micro ultrasound, but also the transperineal. I think the combination of those tools are the ones that discovered a cancer that was hiding, that was not showing up in any of the prior biopsies. If, you know, I know we don't want to get into a labored discussion of it, but the transperineal allows for more access inside the prostate. And I think that's where they were able to identify the greater lesion.
Excellent, thank you. Brian Jarvis has a note here in the chat box. I think it's just a statement. You should all, if you want to, just go visit that and read what he had to say here. Joe, what was the size of your lesion?
I actually can't remember.
All right, no worries.
I was thinking about that this morning. I said, oh, I should go back and look. It was large enough to be visible when we played back the video, but it was not large enough to be visible on the 3 MP-MRIs that I had prior.
So it seems to me that the Select MDX was a very useful tool for you. Should we be suggesting to the audience here that they ask their urologist to give them a Select MDX instead of just relying on the PSA and the PSA density?
Well, the Select MDX and the Exosome DX are 2 of the major, and I hate to call them liquid biopsies because they're not actually assessing the tissue. They're actually looking to see what's in the bloodstream. And I feel that those are, again, additional tools. I don't think there's any one tool or test that should be a limitation. The liquid studies will tell you whether or not there's more in there. The genomic studies that are done, if you do have a biopsy, will also give you an assessment of the material from the prostate. So, you know, I'm a big fan of multiple tests. I don't rely on just one. PSA, for example, Mark Schultz calls it the check engine light, you know, like you would have on your car. It means you need to take a look at it. It does not mean an absolute score. And in fact, prior to any treatments, the PSA can vary a lot for other reasons than just prostate cancer.
Yeah, what I'm wondering, this harkens back to the question that I was asking earlier on the audience's behalf here. You know, we want to catch this as early as we can so we can react as early as we can. You know, for example, Joe, 3 years ago, if you had gone into your doctor and gotten a Select MDX, maybe it would have shown that you had a more aggressive form of cancer, and then that would have precipitated certain other tests, and again, maybe avoiding your situation where you ended up with a Gleason 9. Is that a possibility that had you asked for a Gleason MDX, and the doctors didn't even know about it back then, probably.
The use of that kind of test would have at least given us an indication as to whether or not we needed to go and do further testing, which may have meant do another biopsy if it comes up with a high probability of a Gleason 7 or greater. So that's what that test would indicate. But if the test comes back and says it's not, well, then it says in the bloodstream there are not anything to indicate the presence, and therefore allow you to be able to feel a little bit more comfortable.
Okay, excellent. We have a question here on the Gleason 7. I think maybe we'll defer that Gleason 7 question. Somebody has a Gleason 7. I think we're going to defer that. Okay, knowing what you know now, Anthony asks, knowing what you know now, Joe, would there be anything you would have done differently?
I don't think so, except that I will, one of the things, and one of what I mentioned in my discussion was the fact that being on active surveillance, it also let me learn a lot more about what the opportunities and what the tools and techniques are out there. I'm not critical of my doctors, but I'm saying that I learned a lot more, which got me and would have gotten me to go and explore looking at the micro ultrasound or looking at using other liquid tests. For example, I know that I've been asked about the micro ultrasound, should that replace MRIs? And I've asked both radiologists as well as urologists, and they concur with my opinion, and that is they probably are complementary. They look at things slightly differently, and we hear a lot of panning of the MPMRI, but the one thing about the MRI is it's not going to find those that are borderline or smaller lesions, and that's probably why I consistently got 3 MRIs that didn't point out anything of significant consequence. The micro ultrasound was a much more detailed examination done internally, and that I think is where it comes up. So again, my advice is live, learn, and stay active.
So somebody, I can answer this. Somebody asked here about the MDX comparing to Decipher. The MDX is a urine analysis, and the Decipher is actually a genetic test, and you have to have had a biopsy. And there's at least three different genetic tests, or genomic tests, I should say. There's Decipher, Oncotype, and a third one. Polaris. And when you had a couple of them, is there one?
I had Polaris and the Oncotype. Yes.
Any of those two? Is there one that you would recommend or not?
Both were fine, and the new Decipher used to be used post radical prostatectomy. Then they've expanded it to be used now as used as a genomic test. I would suggest again, if there's any, if once you have the biopsy taken, I would get one of them done. And there are multiple ways of being able to handle that from insurance, or again, not for discussion today and at length. You can also get all sorts of financial considerations, so that really doesn't cost you hardly anything, if anything, out of pocket.
Thank you, Joe. Excellent presentation. And Thrainn, thank you so much as well. I want to just take 1 minute here. This is going longer than we want, but there's so much good information here. We need to let it go longer than we want. Dave, would you be willing to speak just 1 minute about why, Dave Kleiser, that is, 1 minute about why you chose radical prostatectomy rather than radiation or the route that Joe and Thrainn?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I went through a lot of different tests and going to different doctors, and After a long period of biopsies, MRIs, et cetera, they determined that I had a stage 3B cancer. And then the decision was between radiation and surgery. The radiation, they proposed that I go on the hormone therapy for about 18 months, and then do a high dose brachytherapy, and then stereotactic body radiation, which would take some time. Talking with the surgeon, they said they do the radical prostatectomy, but I was able to do a PSMA on a clinical trial basis at Memorial Sloan Kettering, so it didn't cost me anything. And looking at the two versions, the one thing that came to mind is that most the surgeons and even the radiologists said that if you do radiation first, surgery, and if the cancer comes back, surgery is not an option because things are not, things are all melted down there or whatever. So that they suggested, the surgeon of course suggested that they do surgery first, and then if that didn't work, go back to radiation. I was pretty high in my Gleason. I had my biopsy revealed that I had 2 Gleason 8 and 1 Gleason 7. Then I sent it to Epstein and Johns Hopkins, and he said that I had 1 Gleason 9 and 4 Gleason 7s. So at that point, it seemed to me that it was important to do some kind of intervention, and I opted for the surgery because it was faster without the hormone therapy, and also I would have the option to do radiation later on, rather than if I did it the opposite way, radiation first, I wouldn't be able to do surgery. So that's in a nutshell where I ended up.
Mark, can I interject something, because that is, and David, not to counter what you just said, but doing surgery after radiation just requires a good surgeon, is one who is experienced at doing it.
Good to know.
Right. You're right. The surgeon at Memorial Sloan Kettering said he could do it, but it'd be a lot harder,
Okay.
Right.
Great. All right. Thank you, Dave, and all of you. Allow me to move on here. Howard's going to moderate the rest, but let me just introduce Dave Keller, who is going to speak about his amazing journey with now Gleason 7, if I can keep up with his Gleason scores. It's hard to keep up with Dave's Gleason scores, actually. Dave was just one of you. He was part of the audience here and just chose to get involved. He headed up a wonderful program with Dr. Klein just a few months ago that's online here, and I'd recommend, if you didn't see that program with Dr. Klein, go check it out. And so without further ado, I'd like to have Dave tell us about his roller coaster ride.
Let me do a mic check. Can you hear me okay, Mark?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
I'm really happy to be with all of you doing this service for each of us. And I would like to tell you that I'm an author, a writer, written about 8 books. And this journey has caused me to want to create a book for those who are newly diagnosed. So if there's something that you think should be included in a book like that, particularly in diet and lifestyle or anything that you think is important, don't hesitate to reach out to me. There's my email, and it'll be in the chat box later. I'm going to speak kind of fast because there's a lot of information I'd like to get through and still save time, for the rest of our presentation. I, in 2013, had a quote unquote rising PSA, and the doctor at the time, chair of a major educational university, wanted to do 19 core biopsies, take 19 tissues out of my prostate. I knew nothing about PSA. I knew nothing about biopsies at the time. I was totally naive about everything. And when I did research on the PSA and found out that the Stanford doctor that promoted it originally decided that it wasn't that useful, now it's come back into vogue a little bit more. But back in 2013, it was very iffy. And so, and then when I read about the potential side effects and issues with biopsies, I just declined. I didn't know I was going on active surveillance at the time. I didn't know what active surveillance was, but I knew I had to be my own best advocate. And my instinct told me, don't go there. And now I know that in my case, based on my research, you should never get a biopsy before doing a I'm sorry, before doing an MRI or a liquid biopsy to indicate whether or not you even need a biopsy. So you need more indicators than just a PSA before jumping into a biopsy, my opinion. This was mentioned earlier, so I won't go into that. You know that you should really consider your PSA density. And you should also consider your prostate health index. This is a very informative test. You can see here that it measures not only the PSA, in this case, there was a 9 in this particular example, not mine. And the free PSA was a 5. PSA can be attached or unattached. If it's unattached, it's called free. The percentage free PSA in this case was 55%. Now just bring your attention to the bottom of this scale and you'll see that if your free PSA is over 25%, which it was in this case, if you're 60 years old, you only have a 5% chance of prostate cancer. Well, just looking at a 9 PSA, that's pretty scary. And a lot of doctors would be telling you you had to have a radical prostatectomy just based on your PSA score. But if you have a PHI score with a free PSA, you're going to have a much better, more rounded bit of information to make your decision. Here is a quote from the National Institute of Health study. Use of the percentage of free PSA can, and I've got the gallery in my imagery here, it can reduce unnecessary biopsies, okay? So bear that in mind. I, in 2016, still had a rising PSA, but my DRE was normal. I had a fairly large prostate, 60 cc's compared to some, benign BPH. And so I was fortunate to have a urologist that said, you could go on active surveillance, you're okay. In October 2020, my PSA was still rising, hit 7.6. Got an MRI, had a PIRADS-4. I have a 2.9 centimeter lesion. And the prescription was, the diagnosis was to get a biopsy. Well, I did some research, went to a couple of institutions, and I made a mistake. I made my biopsy decision based on availability. One could be done sooner than another, not realizing how different the biopsy experience could be. I just thought a biopsy was a biopsy. Boy, was I wrong. Since prostate cancer is slow growing, taking a little bit of time, up to 2 or 3 weeks to make a decision, wouldn't matter that much. I don't think any of the panelists would disagree with that. And at that time, I was not participating in a prostate group. I didn't know about them at the time. I hadn't researched them yet. Had I been a member of a prostate support group, I probably would have made a different decision than the one I made. I made a decision to go with the earlier local urologist because he could get me in December, and that would free me up, I thought, for holidays with family. Well, again, I didn't know much about biopsies. He did a random saturation biopsy, took out 59 tissue cores. They came back, the hospital pathology department said I had 3+4 Gleason 7s. These were not fusion or targeted. My lesson, this is just me talking, not medical advice, never let a doctor do a random only non-fusion biopsy when a fusion targeted biopsy is required. The MRI showed that there was a lesion there. The tissue sample should have been targeted, at least for part of the biopsy. It's not unusual, up to 25% of people my age to get transperineal high core samples, in this case 59, to experience acute urinary retention. It's pretty horrible. It's like a kidney stone in your penis. They reinserted a catheter, put a catheter in. This was the second catheterization following the biopsy. And 48 hours after they took it out, I was back in the ambulance again. Unfortunately, my acute urinary retention occurred after hours, so I couldn't go to the clinic. And I had to rely on an emergency room. I had 1,400 cc's taken out the first time, 1,800 the second time. If you know about the bladder's capacity, it's only 600 cc's on average At 200 cc's, you get the urge to pee. You can imagine the desire to pee that I had with 1800 cc's. That's hence the pain, because the urethra was so swollen from the attack on the prostate. The urethra wasn't swollen. The prostate was so swollen that it squeezed the urethra shut. So my lesson was, if you get urinary retention, get emergency help immediately. And if you experience urinary retention, have somebody show you self-catheterization so you don't, so you can relieve the pain right away. I carry catheters with me now at all times wherever I go. The second emergency room gave me an antibiotic called Levaquin. 2 days later, a friend called me up and said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just trying to figure out how to kill myself." It turns out that a side effect of Levaquin is being suicidal. But I have to tell you, it just felt like the most normal thing I just wasn't that good at figuring out how to kill myself. So it was taking time. And finally, the side effect wore off. I went into a period of self-catheterization, and I still had to deal with this Gleason 7. And everybody wanted to either radiate or surgeon, take out my prostate. I went to 12 different specialists. I have a good Medicare and Blue Cross Blue Shield, so I have good insurance. And I believe in triangulating. If you only get one opinion, you don't have an opinion. If you've got a second opinion, you're getting there. By a third opinion from another specialist, you're starting to get smarter about what you're dealing with. So in a final conference call with the chair of the Mayo here in Jacksonville, Mayo Urology Department, and a call with my wife, I decided I was going to get a radical prostatectomy. That was a hard decision. Didn't want to make it, but everything pointed to that, so I made the decision. That was at 3:15. At 3:30, I got a second path report from the Cleveland Clinic, and it said I only had Gleason 6. I could go on active surveillance. Talk about a roller coaster ride. This was where I realized you've got to get a second opinion. You've heard people refer to Jonathan Epstein up in Johns Hopkins, highly recommended. So on that same day, I decided I'm going to go after this thing with all I've got. And so I decided to change my diet. I went on what I call a TAB diet: tomato sauce, avocado, broccoli. And all of these are backed by studies that they support prostate health. There's a number of broccoli studies that show that it can reduce the propensity for cancer to develop or to progress. So I have TAB every day, sometimes twice a day. And while starting this diet, I went out and got 3 genomic markers. And one came back low, one came back at the cusp of AS and high risk, and one came back at high risk. The Decipher one said I had a high risk for aggressive cancer. And so once again, the Cleveland Clinic doctor said, you should have your prostate taken out. My choice was to stay on active surveillance and give this diet a chance. I also went from white meat vegetarian to ovo vegetarian. So I'll just have an egg, but I'm vegetarian now. And I wanted to try that out for 6 months, 7 months, and see what would happen with my PSA. So on August 4th, it's now been almost 6, 7 months since I was on this new diet. I had a DRE done by the urologist, and he said, here, take this script and go get your PSA done. And after 8 months on this TAB diet, I was hoping that the PSA was going to be stable or go down. It came back at 9.9. And that freaked me out because I thought, oh my God, I've got an aggressive situation here. I've got an accelerating PSA score. And then I did some research and I found out that if you get a blood sample PSA within 72 hours of a DRE, it can go up 2.5 points. So 4 days later, I went back and I was doing a study. So I went to 4 different labs and got my PSA done. And sure enough, they were all around 7.1. So what's the lesson? There's a lot of factors that can impact your PSA, and never get a PSA done right after you have a DRE. It can radically change your result and give you a misdirection. And a year later, now I thought I would get the best MRI that insurance could buy, and my research brought me to the Rochester Mayo Clinic, where they actually give you a glucose shot injection in your arm to help slow down the movement in your duodenum, to give them a more accurate look without any movement whatsoever of the prostate. It's not disturbed by anything else going on in your body. And came back the same thing as a year ago. So I feel that my diet has sort of stabilized my situation. In fact, the PSA even went down a little bit. And from what I told you, since 2013, it's been a rising PSA. I'm thinking the diet is taking effect. Mayo wants me to get a targeted biopsy of the lesion. They think there's a Gleason 7 in there. My choice is to give the diet a little bit longer time. And I'm going to stay on active surveillance. And in another 6 months or so, I will go to, I'll get a micro ultrasound, and I'll continue to doing the PSA every 3 months. But I'm really hoping that this diet, this is part of the diet. We have someone in our group that takes a teaspoon of pomegranate powder and reishi mushroom powder every day with his oatmeal. And in 3 months, his PSA went down 2 points. So I'm interested in anything and everything that can improve my prostate health and reduce my PSA, and maybe put that lesion in remission. Taking supplements. And I'm reading this book. I highly recommend it to everybody. Eat to Beat Disease, Dr. William Lee. Get it, read it, go to his website, look at his 3-minute YouTube talk that has 3.5 million views, and he'll talk to you about angiogenesis and anti-angiogenesis, and you will improve your diet, and you'll fight prostate disease, and you'll improve your prostate health, I believe. If there's anything you want to learn more from me or share with me, please reach out to my email account. I turn it back over to you, Mark.
Well, Mark
That's you,
passed
that's
the
you, Howard.
baton to me, I know.
Yep.
So Dave, thanks for the presentation. Privately, one of our colleagues here asked for a demonstration of your catheter. So your catheter procedure, I
If I'm
assume
on video, here it is. Here's one of them. It's not. It's still in the envelope.
I'm not sure we're getting your video here.
Oh, that's right. I've got to stop sharing. Excuse me. Thank you.
So is the secret in the wrists?
Yeah.
But at any rate, somebody
It was
else.
awkward. I have to tell you, it was awkward asking the nurse to show me how to self-catheterize. But by that point, I was so traumatized. I wasn't bothered the fact that it was a woman showing me how to stick a tube up my penis.
Well, hopefully it's not every day. Now, somebody else asks, Brian Jarvis asks if Dave's experience is an outlier, and your roller coaster ride. And my observation is that your situation has been a little bit more complicated than most people face. I don't know if some of the other moderators.
I think it is. I think you're right.
So just take Dave as an outlier and assume things are going to go better for you, most of you. You mentioned the PHI test, and I wonder, did you have difficulty getting the PHI test?
No, and here's what's amazing about the PHI test. The 2 times I've had it done in the last few months, and everybody should pay attention to this, it includes the PSA. So I was doing research and I had an independent PSA number done, and I had the PHI done. The PHI is a separate process, a separate assay, but it includes the PSA. And ironically, or interestingly, in both the PHIs, the PSA number within the PHI was less than the independent PHI itself. So something to pay attention to. As Joe Gallo will tell you, there's 2 or 3 or more ways that the PSA is arrived at. by a lab. So you want to go to the same lab because different labs will use different assays. I went to 4 different labs and in a test within 3 hours, all did PSAs, and I got 4 different numbers. So I know from my own research that there are different PSAs that will give you, different assays that will give you different PSA numbers, but the PHI gives you a PSA number. So I would always opt for the PHI over a PSA alone.
Well, I think the main point, well, a main point to emphasize is to be consistent. Once you get on that train, to stick with it so that you have comparable results time after time.
Yes.
So, you know, you mentioned the urinary retention issue that you had. Did you have a precision point transperineal biopsy?
Yes.
You did. Did you have a urinary retention issue with that?
Yes. I had my only one and only biopsy was a transperineal. The research shows that the transperineal, the more tissue that's taken out during a transperineal can actually give you a little higher potential for urinary retention. And so that's what happened to me. He took out 59 samples. On the one hand, you've got a lot more data to work with. On the other hand, your prostate's undergone a pretty severe assault. And so anytime anyone does a saturation biopsy, I'd highly recommend that you be on alert for the prostate swelling and squeezing into the urethra and giving you urinary retention, something to be on the alert of.
Gotcha. I think one last thing, I don't think I've missed any of the questions. Arnold Tanny asks, how do you find a good doctor? Now, it sounds like you and Thrainn have shopped around a bit, but, you know, how do you find a good local doctor?
I think that's one of the preeminent questions to ask. And I think that's why you should join a prostate support group. Ask a lot of people. That's all you can do. Just ask around and get as much input as possible. And eventually, if you triangulate enough with enough outside resources, a certain name will start to pop up more than the others. And then that's the person you go with.
Gotcha. Well, I think we got it covered, Dave, and
thank you.
Appreciate your contribution, and thanks for sharing your catheter. Our next speaker is Phil Segal in Toronto. I've known Phil for a number of years, and he's a longtime patient on active surveillance and has become very active also in organizing support up in Canada. So Phil, it's your turn.
Thanks, Howard. I appreciate the intro, and I'll sort of start off by saying I think, like, my journey has sort of been a plain vanilla active surveillance journey. I've been very fortunate in that regard. I was diagnosed in early March 2007, just before my 63rd birthday, after having had a prostate biopsy earlier that month. The biopsy was suggested because my PSA reading was 4.2. It was only a 6-core biopsy, which I guess was relatively standard at the time, and cancer was indicated on only 1 core with really minimal involvement. At the time, I guess, like many guys, I really knew very little about prostate cancer, and so I spoke with a number of people that were referred to me by friends who themselves had dealt with prostate cancer. I also asked my urologist to arrange for me to meet with a radiation oncologist because I was considering brachytherapy. I hadn't really considered active surveillance at the time. But after meeting with the radiation oncologist, and it wasn't a particularly helpful meeting at all, I decided that I really didn't want to go ahead with treatment, and I began to consider active surveillance as an option. So I told my urologist about this in May 2007. And I just made a note about some of the, I have my urologist case file notes, and I'm going to, a couple of quotations. he said, this is in his writing, we talked about various options again, and for now, myself, would like to go with active surveillance. The shortcomings thereof were discussed. The shortcomings and risks and potential of the cancer from going potentially curable to incurable were discussed. So, I mean, you can sort of see that the emphasis really is, or the emphasis was on the fact that, you know, my cancer could advance. And I don't know how many of you guys, or how many guys that are on this webinar had been to one of the ASPI webinars, the one on Sweden, where they talked about what they do now with regard to active surveillance. I guess if I was in Sweden right now, the doctor would say to me, or would have said to me, you know, not congratulations, but yes, you have prostate cancer, but you really don't have, or you don't have to worry because it's a cancer that will not advance, at least given the score. Anyhow, during this time, and prior to my next biopsy, I was followed with quarterly PSAs and DREs. So in August 2008, about 15 months after my initial diagnosis, I did a confirmatory biopsy. It was 10 cores this time, and they came back all negative. By that time, I'd been an active member of the Toronto Man-to-Man Prostate Support Group and had heard and learned a lot more about prostate cancer. I also requested a second opinion from one of the top oncology surgeons in the city, and after meeting with him in September 2008, my decision to stay on active surveillance was pretty well confirmed. My decision was supported by my wife, and I never really heard anything from friends that was anything but supportive. In other words, no one really questioned to me about not doing anything about my cancer. So during the next 2.5 years, I was followed by my urologist on a quarterly basis, and everything was normal with my PSA remaining in a fairly narrow band. I had my third biopsy in May 2011, so that's a little more than 2.5 years after the second one, the confirmatory one. Again, a 10-core biopsy, and this was also negative. At that time, my follow-up was changed to twice annual meetings. My fourth biopsy was in August 2015, so that's about 4.5 years later. So 8.5 years in, and this will be my fourth biopsy. However, prior to this biopsy, I requested having an MRI since I really wanted the biopsy to be directed to anything that might be suspicious that could be found with an MRI. The MRI came back. My urologist said there were no suspicious areas. I had the biopsy, 14 cores this time, which also came back negative. So this takes us up to April 2019, my last biopsy, my fifth biopsy, and this was a transperineal biopsy. 12 cores were taken, all of which came back negative. I'm hoping that will be my final biopsy, and I'll be able to be followed with PSAs and DREs from now on. So I guess in summary, my decision to follow active surveillance was a good one for me. It allowed me to continue as normal a life as possible, despite living with prostate cancer. Do I think about, are there anxious moments? Yeah, I guess, I do my scores twice annually, and when I get a PSA, I always think about it, but it's definitely become less of an anxious time as the years moved on. One of the points I'd really like to sort of stress, and I think it's a point that's been made by the previous speakers, is that one of the factors that has really allowed me to be comfortable, if I can use that word, with active surveillance, is that I've become very involved with my local prostate support group and other prostate cancer groups across Canada and the US. I've learned an awful lot over the years. It's so that, should treatment become necessary, I really think I'm in a significantly better position to deal with it, given the knowledge that I have. I guess the thing is, you really get to know what you should know. And so when you approach medical professionals, you're dealing on a really knowledgeable basis. You can ask questions and you can hear their answers. And if you don't agree with them, you can have, a relatively educated discussion with them. the other, I guess, the other opportunity is one that's also, or the other point that's also been made is the fact that having been on active surveillance for close to 15 years, should I have to go on treatment? Obviously, what's available today is significantly better than what was available when I was initially diagnosed. So, that's my story. It's been a relatively painless journey to now, and I hope it continues.
So Phil, David was on the roller coaster, and it sounds like you were on the merry-go-round.
Exactly.
So, please enter your questions for Phil. And, Phil, you mentioned the negative reports that came back. So just to clarify, was your cancer only ever seen once?
The cancer was only ever seen once. And I guess, I wouldn't do it. I mean, obviously I can't do it now, but I mean, again, had I known a lot more, I would have probably sent the diagnosis to someone like Epstein for a second reading, because it just would have been something that I would have done to get a second opinion on the pathology.
Yeah. Now, Rob K asks a related question. You had all these cores over the years that were negative, but what makes you conclude you had cancer at all? I mean,
well, I guess there was one core that wasn't the first biopsy where there was one core that wasn't negative. It was diagnosed as being cancer, so I accept the pathologist's report. All I would say is that given what I know today, I might have decided to have the pathology report read by someone else to see what their conclusion was.
Do you think if you were diagnosed today that you would have you weren't diagnosed today, you just presented today.
No.
You don't think you would be diagnosed?
Who knows? I really don't know. But I know that if it was one, if I had one core out of 10 and was diagnosed as a Gleason 6, I'd probably want to have a second opinion on it just to confirm that that indeed was cancer. And then the questions come up, and I think many of the people who are on this on this webinar have heard it before. Is Gleason 6 really cancer?
Right. Well, there seems to be a lot of inquiring minds here about what your PSA level is. So can you give us a little peek at your PSA?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So my PSA has ranged, I guess. I've been on Avidart, so the PSA, I was on Avidart. I've discontinued on it, but my PSA has gone from. I've got it. Let me just. I haven't got somewhere around 1.3 to somewhere around 1.8, and it's gone in that narrow band for since I've taken, I guess from God, I can go from 2000. I've got records here from 2017 to 2021, and it's almost like a straight line from. It's gone from 1.8 to 1.5, 1.4, 1.3, 1.4, 1.7 in a really, really narrow band. Now you could double those scores if I wasn't on Avidart.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, so it stayed somewhere between, I guess, 2.5 and 3.5 if you wanted to do quote non-Avidart scores, and at a very consistent level.
Did you have any side effects from the medication, and why did you stop recently taking it?
The only real side effect from the medication is just a loss of ejaculate. it really hasn't, it really didn't affect me. It did shrink my prostate, which was really good. Why did I stop taking it? I guess I'm not that keen on taking medication. I only want to take medication where I think it serves a purpose. And having been involved with the group, a couple of, I've heard from Dr. Mark Schultz, I've heard from Lori Klotz, that Avidart for patients who have been on long-term active surveillance really doesn't do anything. It really is much more of a BPH drug, and that's what it should be used for. So, I decided, after having been on it, that, I really wanted to get off and see.
So let me ask you this. Did Avidart actually have more symptoms than anything that your cancer had caused?
I'm not sure I understand it, but I don't.
Well, I mean, somebody is asking, have you ever had any symptoms that gave you pause or concern with active surveillance?
No. I mean, I have to say the Avidart did shrink my prostate for, and I guess that's probably good. But I still get up a couple of times a night, and I was hoping that, I'm getting off it because I want to see if it's going to make any difference to my quote nightly bathroom trips, and I'm not. So far, it hasn't. So
your nightly journey, huh?
My nightly journey, yes.
Yeah. Now, Anthony Henry up in Toronto is asking if you made any dietary changes or lifestyle changes.
I did. I should have mentioned that. So I guess the one. Can we say the one good thing? But I'll reinforce what Thrainn said. I washed my coffee intake. I'm sort of like a decaf person instead of a calf person. Red meat, I definitely have really reduced intake of red meat in general. I've always had a relatively decent diet, but I guess I'm much more fruit and vegetables than I previously. And the one thing is definitely exercise. I mean, I've always been active, but I mean, I really make a point of being active, and I think that's really helped, both psychologically and physically.
I think I just have one more question for you. You mentioned that recently you'd switched over to transperineal biopsies. And, now Dave described earlier having a urinary retention issue because he had so many samples taken. And, what I've observed is some physicians who are especially new at doing transperineal kind of signal that it's going to be more painful than the transrectal. Some of them, some of them also kind of push the idea that it should be done in an operating room. And I know there's a new study out showing that really you don't need to go into an operating room. But what has your experience been?
I'm really fortunate. Being in Toronto is we've got two hospitals that are centers of excellence, and really a lot of the hospitals that are associated with those two centers of excellence are pretty good themselves. My urologist is part of a group that only does transperineal biopsies. They started it about 3 or 4 years ago, and there's an article in the I think I'm not sure whether it's AUA or the Canadian Journal of Urology. Like they've done close to 1,300 transperineal biopsies with like really hardly any sepsis and hardly any issues like the acute urinary retention that Dave was talking about. They do it in a non operating room setting. They do it under local anesthetic. It really, and they don't use precision points. It's done freehand. And honestly, it was, I would say it was, I want to say I guess it was somewhat easier than the rectal biopsy. I certainly didn't have it. I'm fortunate. I haven't had any issues with the transrectal biopsies, but I thought that this one was somewhat easier than the transrectal. The one advantage was that there was usually with the transrectal there was always some bleeding. You know, it didn't last long, but there was always some bleeding. With the transperineal, there was like virtually nothing.
Well, listen, thanks, Phil, Dave, Thrainn, and everybody else. And I'm going to turn the podium over to Mark.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you, Phil. I wanted to mention too, you mentioned Avodart, and the other drug that was used extensively was finasteride. And I was actually on that, I've been on active surveillance for 16 years. I was on that for about 6 months, and I began to feel side effects from it, lack of libido, and I think even depression. And I just saw today that there's a major lawsuit with Procipia. It's called Procipia, and that has 1 milligram of finasteride in it. And due to the long-term side effects of this lawsuit is wending its way through the courts. And I think when I was on finasteride, I think I was probably getting 5 milligrams. So apparently it has some serious side effects. And I, like you, my approach is generally the less is better. In any event, I hope that all of you on this call, and all of you are pretty much still here. This is pretty impressive. I hope, Phil, I really sense that you have achieved a peaceful, easy feeling, and I know you're an Eagles fan too, so how appropriate that we end with you. And I hope that all of you that are on the call here, maybe for this short period of time that we're together, have found a peaceful, easy feeling as well. There's always hope. In these phone calls, in these Zoom calls, a huge amount of hope. And it's all also positive. And I even learned from the stories that were told, and I know these stories already, but I keep learning things. And so if any of you have stories that you want to share, this kind of thing might be something that we'd want to revisit in 6 or 8 months. And if you feel like you have a story you want to tell, send me your email, and maybe we'll repeat this sometime in the future.